everybody, welcome to the Bill Young, Real Wealthy podcast. My name is Alita Cherie, and today I want to talk to you about the Billionaire Boys Club movie breakdown. When I first heard of this movie, I was like, this is just going to be another Wolf of Wall Street type of movie with plenty of sex, drugs, and greed. For the most part, I was wrong. I mean, there was a little bit of that inside of the movie, but for the majority of the movie, it was actually spent taking you on a journey of each of the different characters so that you can better understand their intentions behind their behavior. By the conclusion of the movie, I learned that this movie was based on a true story, which I had not known before I started to watch this movie. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is what I'm going to talk to you about today is the Hollywood version of what they suspect happened. If you have not seen the movie, this will be a spoiler alert, so stop the podcast and watch the movie first if you want to enjoy the suspense leading up to the plot. But don't forget to come back to this podcast episode when you're done watching. Without further ado, let's get into this. The movie begins on July 9th, 1983, with the first character named Dean Carney talking about how he was a middle-class guy whose parents paid for him to go to an all-boys school in Beverly Hills, California. The name of the school was called Harvard School for Boys. Dean wasn't liked by the kids that he went to school with because of a situation that happened way back in 3rd grade. He tried to fit in by trying to obtain money, by being flashy with it. Throughout the movie, Dean displayed the Judas complex, in that he was willing to do anything for money. Dean then introduces us to the next character in the movie, whose name is Joe Hunt, who was actually a scholarship student who lived in a place called the Valley, which would be considered a lower income area of California. They both met at the Harvard School for Boys in California. Joe Hunt was an honest yet a gullible guy because he spent most of his time alone. He just wasn't aware of the type of people that he went to school with, such as Dean and also his rich classmates. One day after Dean and Joe graduated from high school, Dean spotted Joe Hunt while he was trying to sell a car to a client over lunch. He noticed that Joe was still the smartest guy in the room, but he didn't look the part like the rest of the people in Beverly Hills. Joe actually was successful though, because he worked as a trader for the Pacific Stock Exchange, which basically is the Wall Street for the West Coast. He lived still in his neighborhood in the Valley with his father. Joe's mom left when he was 15, so there's not much known about her because he didn't even know where she was. Because Dean saw Joe as a new cash cow for him, he approached Joe and started a conversation, pitching him on the idea of them going to their former classmates to try to convince them to allow Joe Hunt to start trading money based upon his strategies, and lied to them saying that they would get a 50% return on their money, even though they both knew that the gold market that they were trading on had already started to tank. So now we're at the scene where Dean is going to introduce Joe at this club where they're going to run into 3 of their former classmates who happen to have been the 3 richest kids at the school. One of the friends' name is Charlie Bottoms, the other one name is Kyle, and the other was Scott. Charlie Bottoms was considered a very business savvy kid. Therefore, he was the person to go to about business proposals. The other 2 guys, they just knew about money because they were born into money. Joe and Dean both convinced them they're still living under the shadows of their fathers, so they needed to do something that was going to help them stand apart so that people, including their fathers, would start to respect them. But as we'll find out later in the story, after they fall into some deep legal trouble, they decided that they no longer wanted to do business with Joe and Dean. Dean would also introduce Joe to a customer that he had previously sold cars to, named Ron Levine. Ron Levine made a fortune on Wall Street working with the Rothschilds group. Dean was trying to convince Ron to let Joe trade money for him. This guy was a true hustler because he said some pretty shady things throughout the entire movie. So here are some of the quotes, and you can be the judge yourself. Ron made a statement: "Perception of reality is more real than reality itself." I thought Joe at that point would have caught on to that and just said, you know what, deal's off, I don't want to do business with this guy. But no, he was actually drawn into this statement, and he really felt like this is the person that he truly needed to help him to be successful. Another statement that Ron Levine made was, "Sometimes the truth is better than the lie." Another quote from Ron Levine: "If you perform on this account I just gave you, your life will never be the same again." He also made a quote: "I'm from Wall Street. Do you really think people get rich by playing the rules?" Ron Levine, He repeatedly tells Joe that he reminded him of himself. Now remember, Ron admittedly said that he's a hustler. He's shown very clear red flags that he's a con man. He was drawn to Joe because he felt that he was doing some illegal activities, such as him, to try to get money. Ron finally agrees to do business with BBC or the Billionaire Boys Club, but he said he wasn't going to use any other broker, but if they wanted to do business with him, they would have to use his broker. So what he did was he called this guy named Frank, and he put Frank on the phone, and he had Frank to tell the boys how much money they had in their account. Frank announced that they had $4 million in assets to trade. After this announcement, the guys went wild. They started to buy office spaces, luxury apartments, foreign cars. They started to get all the girls, buy all types of drugs. So they really believed that they truly had all this money. But they're going to find out something very devastating, and that is that they actually didn't have any money at all. Ron kept promising that he was going to cut the check, but he never did. Joe started to get eviction notices and late fees, and so Joe ends up calling Frank because he needed some cash because they were over their heads in debt and needed money to pay the bills. Frank explained to Joe that Ron Levine had told him that he was a producer for network news and he was doing a story on Joe's gold system. Ron conned both Frank and Joe, making them both believe that the account was so real so that he could submit a story and get a bank loan for $1.5 million. After hearing the news, this is when the BBC plotted to get the money back from Ron Levine, with Dean insinuating to kill Ron. The movie ends with Ron Levine being accidentally killed and Joe Hunt being charged for the murder, sentenced to life in prison. Meanwhile, Dean Carney is somewhere out there in the world living his free life. So let's talk about the lessons that we can learn from this movie. Number 1, make sure you are aware of the people that you surround yourself with. Make sure if you have to, you do a background check, you get references, but make sure before you do business with anybody, you truly know what their intentions are for wanting to do business with you. Also, make sure you don't overlook things such as character flaws, immoral activity, unethical activity. Make sure they have the same values and the same principles as you. Joe Hunt actually was an honest guy who was corrupted because of the people that he surrounded himself with. And consequently, he is now spending the rest of his life inside of a prison cell. The second lesson I learned is be careful who you ask to be a mentor. A lot of times we want people to be our mentors because we get the feeling that we need to learn something from somebody else, which I do believe in mentorship. But you must be careful of the people that you ask to be your mentors because in this case, Joe Hunt asked Ron Levine to be his mentor. However, Ron Levine had always had ill intentions when helping Joe Hunt. He actually only helped him because he felt like he was a con man and he was a hustler just like himself. He never really saw him as being a better man than him. Therefore, he did not teach him to be one. So when you ask someone to be a mentor, make sure that they are going in a pathway that you want to go into. Otherwise, like this story, you may find yourself in a situation where you either are faced with having to kill that person or you're faced with having to go to jail because they have helped you to make some poor decisions. I also gathered that you need to make sure that you check greed because greed is the root of all evil. So the love of money is the root of all evil, not money itself. So that means people who are willing to do things, even kill somebody in order to get money. If you find yourself feeling those type of urges, you really need to take a step back and ask yourself, why do you feel this way? And is money truly that important where you can put value over money over somebody else's life? Lastly, I know this may be an unpopular opinion, but from the movie, it did not appear that the wealthier guys seem to have had the unethical decisions to make. It seemed as though they still had a set of morals and principles that they lived by. Joe Hunt and Dean Carney were a little bit more able to be persuaded because they did have a lack of money and they did have a lack of power and a lack of influence. So they felt that they needed to do things in a more untraditional way in order to gain money. So in this case, it seemed as though that having money actually was beneficial and that it put limits on what people would and would not do. This is based on a true story. So that is what I got from this movie. I feel like Joe Hunt, based upon how Hollywood presented him, was actually a pretty innocent guy. He was a pretty stand-up guy. He just got himself in the wrong circle of friends and got himself caught up in some legal situations. He's still pleading to this day that he is innocent. So with all that being said, that is what I learned from the BBC or the Billionaire Boys Club. If you like this type of review, leave me a comment and let me know. Let me know if you've seen this movie. What is your thoughts on this movie? What was your biggest takeaways? So that's all I have for now. If you haven't already, consider subscribing, sharing with a friend, and until next time, I will talk to you later.